Well described as a world changer, Lyn White is recognised and respected as one of Australia's foremost animal advocates and animal cruelty investigators. Formerly a South Australian cop, Lyn's move from safeguarding human interests into animal advocacy came with a seismic moment 8 years ago when she saw a photograph of a caged bear in China being farmed for its stomach bile. Lynn became passionate about exposing bile farming and went on to work with the Animals Asia Foundation on Southeast Asia animal cruelty issues before joining Animals Australia in 2003. And she also evolved a new personal and ethical outlook, becoming a vegan, trying to tread lightly and do no harm. And since then, Lynn's conducted numerous successful investigations in the Middle East into the treatment of live export animals, taking her camera into slaughterhouses across the world. Her 2006 investigation in Egypt, during which evidence was gathered of cattle having their tendons slashed and eyes stabbed at Cairo's notorious Basatine abattoir. Amazing, isn't it? And sheep being trussed and transported on roof racks resulted in the federal government suspending the live cattle trade and banning the live sheep trade to that country. And Lynn's work was the subject of a feature article in Australia's most respected publication, The Bulletin. And it was Lynn's camera that captured the recent horrific images of cows in Indonesia suffering for Australia's live export trade, broadcast all over the Australian media in the last few weeks and causing a massive surge in public interest and here as well. Lynn's ethos has always been about being an animal advocate, believing the power to make change lies in the evidence. And today we have the privilege of listening to Lynn to discuss what is the driving force behind her tireless and relentless workload that allows her to work championing animals in Australia. So it's a huge pleasure that I welcome Lynn to the stage right now.
Good evening. I feel very privileged to have been invited here tonight to speak to you. My work on behalf of animals in recent years has taken me to a number of countries that I probably wouldn't have chosen to visit. So it's lovely to be invited here to beautiful New Zealand and to be amongst friends and colleagues who I respect enormously. Well, it wasn't that long ago that I thought that I had my career path mapped out in front of me. I loved being a member of the South Australian Police Force and the challenges that policing presented on a daily basis. I was happy with the salary I earned and also with the career prospects that lay ahead. So if a fortune teller's crystal ball had predicted a decade ago that I would leave policing and that my new career would take me to investigating bear bile farming in Southeast Asia and into the treatment of livestock in slaughterhouses throughout the Middle East and Indonesia, I would have given it no credence whatsoever. If that crystal ball had then suggested that I would be interviewed on every current affairs program around Australia, and that I would become a regular and welcome visitor in the Royal Palace in Jordan and have a Jordanian princess as one of my closest friends. As a police officer, I probably would have stood up and arrested that fortune teller for fraud and deception and seized the crystal ball as evidence. Not in my wildest dreams could I have predicted the dramatic change in direction that my life would take. For all of you who have made lists as to what you want to achieve to feel successful in life, let me tell you that life may well have other plans in store for you, like it did for me. You see, when you become aware of overwhelming injustice and decide to act on it, your life gets thrown into a current, and you have no idea where that current is going to take you, but you know with every fibre of your being that your life is headed in the right direction. That current has taken me to investigations across 3 different continents. And one of the many things that I've learned through my policing career and since as an animal advocate is that it is not successful lives in the traditional sense that this world and all its living beings, whether human or animal, are needing us to lead. They are crying out for us to use our passion and our skills to lead significant lives. There is enormous animal suffering globally, but I have to say that the fact that I'm here tonight speaking to you on behalf of animals rather than driving around in a patrol car back in Australia presents reason to hope and the basis to believe that people can change. For the first 35 years of my life, whilst I would have emphatically said that animals mattered to me, I did nothing to help them. And unbeknownst to me, I was making choices that were contributing to their suffering. So if ever you need an example of how dramatically a life can change simply through becoming informed, it is mine. You know, the sole reason why animal welfare and rights issues are more predominant in today's society is because more and more people are becoming informed about how animals are treated. More and more people are recognising that we have inherited our treatment and our attitudes about animals from past generations, and they don't stand up to ethical scrutiny in 2011. And more people are realising that it is possible to lead happy, healthy and fulfilling lives without harming those that share this world with us. You know, it's a considered strategy of cruel animal industries to try and portray those who work on behalf of animals as part of some sort of lunatic fringe. But the irony is that it is actually our normality that is most threatening to them, and that they recognise that the only thing that actually separates us from the rest of the community is that we've had the opportunity to become informed. I would suggest that throughout my policing career, and since as an animal cruelty investigator, I've had the opportunity to witness more human and animal suffering than most. Yet, not for a moment have I lost my faith in our ability to create a kinder world. Yes, it is going to take an awakening. Yes, it is going to take a profound ethical shift from making choices based on self-interest to considering the interests of others. But I have an unshakable belief that somewhere in each human heart rests the knowledge that we are not meant to harm those that share this world with us, and that our job as animal advocates is to peel back the layers, the centuries of conditioned thinking, and allow that knowledge to have a voice. Tomorrow, I'm going to be talking to you about the investigations that I've conducted, including the recent one in Indonesia, which resulted really in a tidal wave of outrage and grief and distress in Australia and forced the federal government to suspend the live trade. But tonight I wanted to talk to you about, I guess, my awakening and how I came to realise that animals mattered, because it has been quite a personal journey that I want to share with you. I joined the police force as a 17-year-old, mainly to escape my mother's desire for me to become a classical musician and follow in the footsteps of my sisters. So whilst my motivation for joining the police force wasn't pure at the time, the issues of justice and injustice had been instilled in me from an early age by my parents. And during my policing career, and even more now as an animal advocate, they have become paramount in my life. For 20 years, I spent my days and nights driving around in a patrol car answering cries for help from people. No matter what the crises, and let me tell you, the variety was enormous, we were always there to be called on to provide assistance. Over the last decade as an animal advocate, I've come to realise what an advantage we have over animals, simply because we have a language that we can cry out for help in. I've come to realise that because animals can't tell us what they are enduring, that they are treated mercilessly at times. And I've had to come to realise that there is no more vulnerable a being, or one more in need of protection of just and effective laws, than one who is defenceless and voiceless and at human mercy. For 20 years, I advocated and represented human victims, completely unaware that hidden away from view and my knowledge were millions of animal victims, ultimate victims really, who needed my representation and my voice more. Why are animals ultimate victims? Moral innocence, inability to cry out for help, inability to plead for mercy, inability to lay a complaint against you, to run away, to give evidence against you. You know, Gandhi recognised that animals were ultimate victims, and he also recognised one of the key reasons why animals matter when he spoke that famous quote that the progress of a nation, and I can't even get the quote right, you probably can all repeat it to me, can be gauged by the way that its animals are treated. As what Gandhi recognised was that the defencelessness of animals provides us with the ultimate temptation to profit through their suffering, simply because we have the power to do so. But he also recognised that a deliberate choice to deny that temptation and instead to protect them from harm meant evoking the finest elements of our humanity: compassion, mercy, and selflessness. Our relationship with animals is such a privileged and a powerful one. We have the capacity, through treating them kindly, to evoke love and loyalty. And we have the capacity, through treating them cruelly, to evoke fear and aggression. It's time to recognise that their judgment of us and their response to us so clearly mirrors the degree of humanity that they see in us. I've learned so many things through this journey, but one of them is the power of a single photograph or a few minutes of vision. And as you heard, a single photograph certainly changed my life. On one wintry day in the Adelaide Hills, I was sitting there thumbing through a magazine and turned the page to see a photograph of a bear in a cage that was so small that the bars touched it on all sides. As I read the accompanying article, I heard that it had a metal catheter inserted in its gallbladder to have bile drained for traditional Chinese medicine. I couldn't believe that people could be so cruel. And as I sat there, even though I was a tough, hardened female police officer, I had tears streaming down my face. And I realised in that moment that I could either lose myself in my distress or I could try to do something about it. And I contacted the organisation that was working on this issue, the Animals Asia Foundation. And with the encouragement of their inspirational founder, Jill Robinson, she encouraged me to join them and work with them on a voluntary basis and spend my leave assisting in investigations in Southeast Asia. When I was back in Australia, I was public speaking on behalf of Animals Asia to a person. People were appalled by the way that these animals were being treated. The number of times I heard the Chinese called barbarians, we condemned their culture and their ethics. People couldn't believe how cruel they were, and the money poured in to help free the bears. About 3 years after that, I was sent another piece of footage and some photographs, and that footage similarly changed my life. I just want to show you now the issue that took me overseas, and an issue that you're now very familiar with from tonight, the issue that brought me home. This second wake-up call was such an enormous one for me. Here I had been campaigning for basically what was an end to factory farming of bears in China, completely unaware that some 200,000 mother pigs in my own country were being kept in similar terrible conditions for the very same reason, to produce a product for human consumption and to maximise profits. I was shocked and appalled. I considered myself a 40-year-old worldly police officer, and yet I didn't know. And I was so angry because I had unwittingly been supporting animal cruelty through purchasing factory farm products. And then I wondered what other secrets were being kept from us in Australia. And discoveries such as that we were the largest exporter of livestock anywhere in the world, and that we were sending millions of animals each year to countries where there were no laws to protect them from cruelty, increased my shock and shame. There are still Australians who are completely unaware that the vast majority of animals that are in human care in Australia, some 500 million animals that are raised for food, are denied the protection of animal cruelty laws, and as a result suffer immeasurably in factory farms through severe confinement and through having surgical procedures performed on them without pain relief. As a 40-year-old, I didn't know, and when I found out, my conscience called me home. How could I stand up and criticise the Chinese when in Australia we were equally guilty of animal cruelty? We'd just become more adept at hiding the cruelty that we were responsible for behind high walls, closed doors, on ships in the open ocean and in countries 10,000 kilometres away. I left policing when I came to realise that the system of justice that I had been so proud to uphold as a police officer didn't translate to protecting the most innocent and vulnerable members of our society, those who cannot cry out for help, and therefore those who need our protection most of all. Through my career, I have had the opportunity to have a unique insight into the system of justice in place for both humans and animals in Australia, and I would suggest most Western countries. Let's have a look at the definition of justice. Just conduct, fairness, exercise of authority, and the maintenance of what is right. In our human system of justice, we believe that imprisonment and deprivation of liberty is the greatest punishment that we can inflict on anyone who commits a crime against our society. That's because we recognise that denial of freedom is extreme punishment. Despite this, throughout the world, billions of animals are imprisoned in factory farms, literally animal prisons, innocent beings, denied any quality of life whatsoever. How can we suggest that freedom is more important to us than it is to animals? An animal wouldn't struggle in a trap. A fish wouldn't struggle in a net. Animals wouldn't bite on the bars and sway back and forth behind them if they didn't recognise the difference between freedom and imprisonment. In our human system of justice, we consider crimes committed against the vulnerable in society, children and the elderly, to be the most condemnable of all, because that's because we recognise that take advantage of the defenceless is an immoral act. And when determining the penalty, the court always looks to the mens rea, the motivation of the offender. And if that motivation has been to personally profit through that abuse, the penalty is always harsher, except when that innocent, vulnerable being is an animal raised for food. And then we legalise that abuse. The obvious ethical question is why? The very same human traits, cruelty, selfishness and malevolence, are in action whether the victim is a human or an animal. So why, when those human traits are deemed so unacceptable in society, when the victim is a human, is the offender punished? When the victim is an animal, are they financially rewarded? You know, through my policing career, I saw the law used as an effective tool to ensure justice for victims. But since I've been working as an animal advocate, I've seen the law used to effect injustices of mammoth proportions. There are many who work in this field and advocate animal rights, and I completely understand this. But for me, addressing injustice and ending animal cruelty is a matter of identifying and addressing human wrongs. As I mentioned earlier, despite all of the suffering that I have witnessed, I retain an absolute unshakable belief that somewhere in each human heart rests the knowledge that we are not meant to harm those who share this world with us. I'm sure that not a person in this room could see an animal suffer without being distressed, and you're not alone. Certainly in Australia, it's actually quite difficult to get animal cruelty stories on television because executive producers know that they don't rate, that nothing will make someone turn the channel quicker than the prospect of seeing an animal suffer. And I would argue this is because we inherently know that we're not meant to cause them distress, so seeing them in distress does cause us distress. Just for a moment, let's say that I'm not crazy and what I say is right. The obvious question is, how could humanity have lost its way so badly? And this is something that I've thought deeply on. And I've realised as a species we have one very big hang-up. We don't know why we're here, why we're born, what the purpose of life is all about. And this has led to an inherent insecurity that has pervaded humanity from the dawn of time. And if you look back through history, you can see that the standard way of trying to overcome that insecurity was to subjugate, to control, to rule and dominate others, usually through aggression and violence. And an examination of the others is really interesting as well, because they were always considered in some way different from us, and therefore inferior. Different skin colour, different language, different God, different species. Somewhere, way back, our ancestors took a wrong turn in trying to find security in life and thought that it would come through dominating others. And history speaks for the tragic consequences of both humans and animals involved. But without doubt, those who have borne the greatest cost of our insecurity are members of the animal kingdom. Our ancestors centuries ago set in train attitudes towards and treatment of animals that has been repeated generation after generation, mostly without question. Should we just follow in the footsteps of our ancestors without questioning the rightfulness of it? You know, I looked up the definition of ignorance, and it said lack of knowledge, learning and information. It could just as easily have said ignorance is following without questioning. Well, the defining point in my life was when I realised that I was ignorant, that I had inherited my attitudes and my opinions, that my thoughts were the thoughts of others, they weren't even my own, let alone being representative of my own mind and heart. And despite the fact that I had always loved animals, I was making choices that were contributing to their suffering. And I came to realise that we had been conditioned by past generations to think of animals in categories as to the role that they play in our lives, rather than considering their lives. And this has now been reflected in our legislation. The animals that we bond with and that we get close to have been given protection from cruelty through our legislation. Those that we don't want to bond with and get to know, definitely don't want to get to know, the animals that are killed and eaten have been denied that protection in our legislation. It certainly pays if you're an animal to be born into the category of friend, not food. We know that the greatest cause of animal suffering globally is in food production, in factory farms, in transport, and in slaughterhouses. It was an awakening for me to realise that the only reason that I ate animals was because my parents did, and they did because their parents did, and so on and so on. You know, in 2011, our society is faced with the enormous challenge of recognising that killing and eating animals is unnecessary. It is a personal choice, and a choice that has such consequences that it requires the deepest consideration of the facts. And the facts in 2011 are telling us that the single greatest individual choice that we can make to protect the health of our planet, to protect our own health, and to save millions of innocent beings from suffering is to reconsider the diet that we inherited from our cavemen ancestors. Since we can lead healthy, happy, fulfilling lives without harming those that share this world with us, why on earth wouldn't we? You know, science is telling us that change is needed. And when you become aware of the suffering of animals in production systems, your heart tells you the very same thing. All of the world's religions speak of kindness and mercy to animals. And I can tell you from very, very personal experience, you will not find God in a slaughterhouse. I'd like to suggest to you a rather radical premise tonight, one that addresses that need to live significant lives and also potentially answers that question that we all face as to why we're here. What about if the purpose of each new generation is to question, to not just accept what generations before us have accepted, to identify where there is injustice and right it, to identify where our species has made mistakes and correct those mistakes? What about if the purpose of each new generation is to leave this world a better, a kinder and more ethical place for those that follow us? It's not such a radical premise, is it? In actual fact, it's a reality, a responsibility, and an opportunity that has been long there waiting for us to awaken to it and embrace it. You know, we sometimes forget that one day our children's children and those that will follow them will look back at the time that we spent on this earth and how we treated this world and the living creatures that shared it with us. How will history remember us? Should we just walk in the footsteps of our ancestors? You know, if others had done that before us, people who expressed a different opinion would still be burned at the stake, and people that have a different skin colour would still be enslaved around the world. Every civilising step in human history has been opposed and ridiculed before being accepted as self-evident. Human ethics have only continued to evolve because people in each generation, people just like you, have refused to accept being different as justification for oppression and for cruelty. Causing unnecessary suffering to living beings who, just like us, feel fear and pain and love and joy, simply because we have the power to do so, can never be right. And deep down, we know that. Why do animals matter? Well, they matter simply because they are living, breathing, feeling beings that share this world with us. But they also matter because their defencelessness and vulnerability challenges the best in our humanity to come forth and protect them from harm. This is not just about them. This is about us and our humanity. It's about not just being human beings, but being humane beings. Why are we here? Well, none of us know for sure. But whether we like it or not, we are part of an extraordinary journey, and that is the journey of mankind. And every time we become less cruel, more selfless, more humane, our own species takes a step towards fulfilling its potential and a step closer to living in peace. Somewhere in each human heart rests the knowledge that we are not meant to harm those that share this world with us. Ironically, those who have suffered longest and most at human hands may well be our saviours. Animals may be voiceless, but if you listen, you will hear them. Somehow their suffering is calling our humanity to awaken. It's been a great privilege to be here with you tonight. Thank you.
Julia Gillard, step aside. It's amazing when you hear someone like that speaking, really in a sense, just from a higher plane. Maybe how we'd all be speaking in maybe 200 years' time, really. But also too, that message, I guess what I'm taking from it is when you've descended into depravity, as you have. I'm just personally really shocked by those images. I've never seen some of those before. And yet you're able to sort of gel that information and actually say, well, we can progress now. There is optimism, moving ahead. That is something. Please, another round of applause for Lynn. That is something else.